The video that I chose is The Times of Harvey Milk. This documentary was on the short but quite effective political career of Harvey Milk, the first openly gay city official in the United States in San Francisco, California. Originally from Woodmere, New York, and born to a Jewish family, Milk lived a seemingly normal childhood and teen years. After college, he joined the Navy and later took up a career as a stock consultant. In the 1960s, Milk befriended theater people and worked his way up to being a producer on Broadway. He came out to his friends and fully accepted the orientation that he had been aware of since the age of 14. He met his lover, Scott Smith, and together they moved to San Francisco and opened a camera shop. He threw himself into neighborhood politics, caring deeply about the growing gay community, and was officially known as the mayor of Castro Street. Milk saw many issues that were not being addressed in the city and decided to run for the Board of Supervisors in 1973. He lost, and many people upheld their notion that he was a bit of a joke. He ran 2 more times and lost in both. His spirit was not extinguished, however, and he continued with neighborhood politics. When George Moscone was elected as mayor of San Francisco, things changed. Moscone supported and respected the diversity of the city and wanted to set up a plan for neighborhoods to run the city they lived in and called it district elections. By this time, many gay men and women had moved to San Francisco and the area surrounding the Castro, which had become known as the Gay District. In 1977, Milk launched his 4th campaign for the Board of Supervisors. From the beginning, the campaign seemed like it would not be effective. He had a very young woman, Anne Cronenberg, who was very enthusiastic but inexperienced running his campaign. The people who worked on Milk's campaign were a diverse group. There were young and old, gay and straight, and many of different races. Milk was very good at making people feel welcome and crossing barriers to get people on his side. This is evident in the support he had from union leaders. The union had been boycotting Coors beers for quite a while, and Milk had lobbied hard and successfully and got Coors beer out of the gay bars in the area. Milk's commitment to rights for not only gays, but for other underrepresented groups gave him a good support of voters. One journalist who had interviewed him before the election talked about how full of life Milk was and about how impressive and great of a speaker he was. When Milk won the election, the celebration on Castro Street was as joyous as any New Year's Eve celebration. In an interview during the celebration, Milk joked that gays are taking over San Francisco, but assured the news reporter that he cared deeply about many of other issues in the city. With the help of district elections in 1977, the Board of Supervisors had the first gay man, the first Chinese American, and the first black woman to be elected to the Board of Supervisors. Dan White, the other man that was elected, his election was ignored in the event of the new people who were elected. He was a small-town type, charming, with family values. During Milk's 11 months on the Board of Supervisors, Milk worked hard to help rent control, improve public transportation, education, and anything that would help improve the lives of the little people. Milk viewed his candidacy as more than just a political statement, but as a part of the gay movement. One of the biggest accomplishments during his term on the Board of Supervisors was the passage of the Gay Rights Bill. This prevented gays already employed from being fired if they were to come out. The event that launched Milk into statewide awareness was the Briggs Initiative. The Briggs Initiative was Proposition 6 that was against homosexuality. This proposition would allow parents to choose who would teach their children and potentially fire any homosexual teachers. Milk and Sally Gearhart, a lesbian and former high school teacher, went on TV to debate with Senator Briggs. The Briggs campaign had previously been printing pamphlets that claimed that removing homosexual teachers would reduce the number of child molesters. Gearhart and Milk argued that the FBI and the National Council on Family Relations did studies that showed that 90 to 95% of child molesters were in fact heterosexual men. The campaign for and against Proposition 6 began shortly after this debate. 4 months before the election, a poll showed that a majority of California was for the proposition, and everyone was sure that the gay movement was going to lose the fight because the numbers didn't look good. In the end, the grassroots movement brought the race closer and closer until Election Day. They ended up winning by a 59 to 41% majority, stopping the passage of Proposition 6. Shortly after this victory, Dan White, Milk's much-ignored colleague, resigned from the Board of Supervisors without stating reasons for why he had. When a call for a new election happened, White wanted to be reinstated onto the board, but Moscone was the only one with that power. Moscone decided that he did not wish to reinstate White. On November 10, 1978, Harvey Milk and Mayor Moscone were assassinated in City Hall. Dan White went into the mayor's office and they got into a heated argument about the issue of his reinstatement. Well, White pulled out a gun and shot Moscone twice in the head. He reloaded his gun and continued on to Milk's office where he shot him 5 times. After this tragedy, the streets were very quiet and almost surreal. People were shocked and more silent and mourning than angry out of respect for the enormity of the situation. In the following weeks, many closeted gays came out and saying that they had been touched by the huge funeral procession that had occurred on Castro Street. Those who knew him said Milk would have been happy that his death had brought such positivity. In a tape that Milk had made in the event if he were to be assassinated, he had said that if a bullet should enter my brain, let the bullet destroy every closet door in the country. When White was put on trial, he gave an emotional confession about being under a lot of pressure and said that he had shot them both out of instinct and had not premeditated the assassinations. The prosecution argued that he had premeditated the murders by putting extra bullets in his pocket and climbing through a window to avoid metal detectors. The defense lawyers were able to get Dan White's conviction down to voluntary manslaughter, and he only served 5.5 years. Many believed that he had gotten away with the assassinations, and if it had simply been the assassination of the mayor and not a gay supervisor as well, the conviction would have been swift and just. There were riots in the streets, people trashed City Hall, burned cars, and protested in mobs. White received no psychiatric help during his sentence and committed suicide shortly after his release. This movie related to some of the material that we discussed in class because it touches on issues such as civil rights and equal rights, the idea of majoritarian versus pluralism, and how effective small local government can be. The main theme of this documentary was about the struggle for not only gay rights, but for the rights of minorities in the community that were underrepresented. In the case of fighting against Proposition 6, it can be argued that pluralism came into play because a small, passionately dedicated grassroots organization fought hard and defeated a discriminatory practice when it appeared that a majority of the people in the state were for the discriminatory proposition. In terms of state and local government, this documentary showed how effective a smaller local government can be when they are closer to their constituents. This documentary definitely had a couple biases in it for a couple reasons. They showed Harvey Milk in a very positive light and never mentioned any possible negative things about his term, his personal life, or anything else. It wasn't necessary for all those things, but it keep it almost 100% betrays biases. The makers of the documentary only interviewed people who were close to Milk and who knew him personally and saw him in a positive light. The film definitely took on a pro-gay, pro-Harvey Milk stance, but that is not inherently a negative thing. I learned many important things from this film. I learned about how difficult it was to get elected to a board of supervisors, especially when you are a part of a minority group. I learned about the struggle of the first openly gay public official in the United States, and about how hard it was to defeat Proposition 6 in California. I also learned about how grassroots organizations can be difficult but effective if organized correctly. One of the weaknesses that I noticed during the film was the length. At times, the film talked about facts or events that didn't seem important and seemed very irrelevant to the subject. It added much more time to the film. If they had cut out the more irrelevant parts, it would have been a shorter film, and it would have been easier to focus on and stay as interested. I would definitely recommend this movie to others. It was very informative, inspiring, and had a little bit of humor that took away from some of the seriousness of the movie. The people who were interviewed and talked about how inspiring and amazing Harvey Milk was to be around and work with through the interviews made me feel inspired and amazed by Harvey Milk. All in all, I was inspired and very well informed by this documentary, The Times of Harvey Milk. I was inspired particularly by a quote said by him in a tape recording that he made in the event of his assassination. He said, "I fully realize that a person who stands for what I stand for, an activist, a gay activist, becomes a target or the potential target for someone who is insecure, terrified, afraid, or disturbed themselves." Milk knew that his work was controversial and could bring people to do terrible things. While he knew that, he still moved on and worked for the common good.